Hello, and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, long time. We've done 2 comic book podcasts together. If you search the deep recesses of the internet, you will find them. And our guest is Drew Hood.
Yeah, glad to be here, guys.
Yeah, wait, I think I mentioned last week that Drew was probably the person who introduced, I think I saw something about the Long Halloween on the DVD extras from Dark Knight, and I was like, hey, have you ever heard of this little boutique book? And Drew was like, yeah, it's kind of a big deal.
Let me tell you all the things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you didn't stop talking for about 2 hours. So so anyway, I think we wanted to start with, Drew, how you came to this book. Was this your first exposure to Loeb and Sale, or were you like already kind of tapped into the Loeb Sale chemistry, or did you find them through Marvel first and then over to their DC work? How'd you get here?
This was my first real introduction to Loeb and Sale. I had remembered seeing in the past, I believe it was some of their work on, maybe it was Daredevil with Marvel. I'm not really sure which book it was. But I remember seeing some of it, but it wasn't until Long Halloween that I mean, it just instantly caught my attention. When I had sort of gotten back into comics around 2002, and then that was right around the time that Batman Begins was coming out, Iron Man was coming out, Dark Knight would soon follow. And I really started picking up graphic novels, as fast as I could, especially, living near Half Price Books. I would just go and I would grab everything that was Batman because I was always a Batman fan. And so it was probably around, I would say 2008, 2009 when I started really falling in love with Loeb and Sale. And this was the book that did that. Like, this was the one that really catapulted it.
Was it mainly because, I would maybe guess initially because it was specifically Batman?
Yes. Yeah. Initially it was because it was Batman. And when I read it, unlike the other Batman stories that I was reading at the time, and unlike the main run, this was so focused on Batman being a detective. It was very much sort of a, sort of guerrilla warfare on the ground, sort of book. And that's what really caught my attention. So Loeb's story, I think, I don't know that there's a better Batman story out there. I know some people argue, with Dark Knight Returns and different things, but as a whole completed story, 13 issues, whatever it ended up being, I think that this is probably the best Batman story. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. I mean, we can see it on the screen. We can see its influence on the screen in a number of the Batman films that have come out since then.
I caught even more on this reread. Like,
yeah,
I saw
yeah.
not just things from Dark Knight, but also the Batman.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, Batman and Catwoman like breaking into the same safe, like having a little tussle before the security shows up. I'm like, that was ripped straight out of this book, and I completely forgot it.
Matt Reeves, this was one of the books he listed, just like Jonathan Nolan had listed this for. I know he specifically said Dark Knight, and this is, but there are elements of this book that are also kind of infused in Batman Begins because this book in the Batman chronology falls in that year 1, year 2 time. I mentioned last week, part of this shift is part of the shift in the Batman story at that time, in that time period, was him moving away from fighting organized crime into fighting supervillains. And obviously here in Long Halloween, there's still both of them. Their Arkham exists, and we'll get to one of the, I think, greatest pages is that double page splash of all the villains, the old school villains that Sale draws is so gorgeous. So they all exist, but he's still going up against the mob. He's still going up against Falcone and Maroni. So, or Falcone, I don't know how.
Falcone, I was going to say we got to have to decide.
I mean,
what we're going to do about
right?
That.
So it's got to be Falcone. It's like, are you Vito Corleone or Vito Corleone? Right?
I think it's only Falcone if you use your hands to say it as well, though.
You know what? That's fair. It's Falcone. But yeah, so he's in that transitional period. So the fact that both Nolan and Reeves focused their movie, or at least Nolan started with it's called Batman Begins, starting in that year one. How does he become Batman? How does he start? It made sense that he would go back in terms of what's become the canonical story of that time for Batman. It is Long Halloween, and it's year one, Long Halloween, and what comes after Long Halloween. It fits into that time frame, and whatever kind of came before this kind of usurped it and said this is like the definitive story, or a definitive story of that time.
Yeah.
So
there's
and I'm
nothing
sure we're
more
gonna
comic booky than to say a definitive story.
Right.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about it. But one of the things that I also think, I mean, you had mentioned, the villains in the Rogue Gallery, and, it's kind of juxtaposed with, the war on crime and just sort of the, low level mobsters, but also playing a huge role. And this is where I think Sale shines in this book so much, is that the city itself seems to be a character of its own.
It looks great.
And the way that he draws it just absolutely draws you in. He does this thing where he has this gothic noir style without it being gritty. And I think that it's a weird thing to say, but like he relies heavily on shadows rather than just like grit and grime and kind of the, like when you read The Dark Knight Returns, you get this really sort of dirty, grimy Gotham City, whereas this one feels soaked in shadows, which I think is such a different feel to this story.
It feels more ominous than dangerous.
Yeah.
Which maybe that's a semantic difference there. But I think you're right. There's something about his style. It weirdly it feels like when I read it, especially now, it feels like the Gotham of like the animated series.
Right.
It's that retro future kind of, a lot of Art Deco, but for him it is more of that Gothic feel to it. But
yeah,
you're right. You do get a sense that Gotham really is a character. Whenever we get some wide shots, some of his 1-page and 2-page splashes where you see the city and all that. Yeah, you're right. It looks incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, the distinction I would make there is that it doesn't. I think some lesser Batman art looks like they did regular art and then they just put like a dirty Instagram filter on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or or just like did like a black wash over the whole thing to darken the aesthetic. And there's something very natural and organic about.
Or they try too hard to mirror it after an existing city.
Yeah. Like
a lot of times it'll be like, well, this looks like New York, or this looks like Chicago, or this and this just looks like Gotham. Like it looks like its own thing.
Yeah. So, well, that's great. I think so. None of us were pulling this single issue. We all found it once it was collected in trade.
Yeah.
I definitely did.
Yeah. I think Drew, you said you would come back into comics in like 2002 or something like that. That's for me, it's almost the exact same when I came right back in after having not read.
What are the chances they got good again and you both came back?
Yeah. Well,
Marvel and DC were firing on all cylinders.
Yeah. Well, and I've talked to people about this. Like the time at which I basically jumped off was basically when my older brother went to college, meaning the flow of comics stopped into our house. So that was like mid 90s, and you talk to people about that, and there's kind of a weird reframing of 90s comics now. Like, maybe it was satire, or there's a level of camp to it. A lot of them are just bad. It's bad art. It's bad writing. I don't feel like I missed a whole lot, at least in the mainstream stuff. And then you get something like this and the early Loeb Sale work they start working through the 90s into the early aughts. And so this is when that book is coming out, which makes it seem like such an anomaly, which is why what I said last week, Mike, about how I felt, even though these are, superhero comics from the big two publishers, and they are in continuity, meaning they're not like Elseworld stories. Like these are stories about the characters you've been reading. They feel like indie comics. They feel like creator comics because they were coming out in a landscape where like books didn't look like. And Batman at the time, right now at this time, Batman was being done by Doug mentioned Kelly Jones. They did about 40 some odd issues together, and it's a celebrated run. They're celebrated creators, and you can get I think all of their Batman stories have been collected in like one or two compendia or whatever. So you can get this era. But I think this time period, though, specifically gets kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit, because a couple years right before Long Halloween comes out was Nightfall,
Right.
Night Quest, so that's Bane, that's Ash, it's all of that stuff. And then a year after Long Halloween finishes is No Man's Land.
Yeah.
So those are when you go to a Batman shelf in a comic shop or a bookstore and you see the trades that are there, like you'll probably see the collected Nightfall and you'll see the collected No Man's Land, especially after Dark Knight Rises, because Nolan used both of those as foundations for that story. You're not going to find probably the collected works of Mensch and Kelly together, so if you're reading Batman, the main title Batman, I don't want to call it like a fallow period or down anything like that, because I wasn't reading it at the time. But when you have these big two tentpole events on either side of the era this is coming out in, the regular Batman title is going to get lost. And so in the midst of all that, this book comes out and said, Sale's art is so specific. Mike and I talked about this last week, Drew, that it is, Sale is a one of the few truly unique artists where you see his stuff and you're like, oh yeah, that's Tim Sale. And very few people ever try to emulate or copy that, because you can't do it, because it's so clear that you're doing Sale, because he's so singular in his approach and his character work and all of that. He's not going for the hyper realism.
Right.
He's not going for the 90s style where anatomy didn't matter.
Yeah.
Where the muscles were in places that already had muscles, but those muscles, and you think about, some of those books that that all the Image guys did late 80s and the 90s, that's what kind of the vibe was. And you get something like this that's so different. I can't imagine what it would have been like if you're reading Batman, like, oh, hey, there's this miniseries coming out, and kind of seeing the shock of what his character design looks like, with the long ears and the insanely long, Spawn,
the cape
like
grows.
it gets longer and longer. It gets bigger and bigger. Yeah.
Until the point where he's like on the roof with Catwoman. Yeah. And he's literally just a cape and eyes.
Yeah.
And he's 3 times her size.
Well, and that's what I love so much about his artwork, especially in Long Halloween. Number one, you get to see him play with all of the major characters, all the major villains, everybody. And he has this way of exaggerating features on each one of them in such a unique way that when you look at it, you don't think to yourself like, oh, that's just an exaggerated figure. Like for instance, with the Joker, and he's got the really long teeth and sort of rictus grin, but it doesn't take you out of the story. Like, it doesn't look silly because it matches everything else that he's doing, that you're just like, enamored with like what the Joker looks like. Or, one of my favorite ones that he does is Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
And she's got these leaves everywhere, and it's so exaggerated, but like when you look at it in the context of the page, it's just gorgeous. I mean, it's so clever,
and no one has drawn Ivy like that.
Right.
Where, is it her hair? Is it vines? Is the answer to that question yes? But yeah, you're right. It's so absurd in some way, because you're right. There's the one scene of when Poison Ivy has Bruce under her control, and you get the big long shot of the dinner table.
Yeah,
the very it's a joke that's repeated, that when Bruce pets people over, they're sitting on opposite ends of this table that's got to be like 40 feet long. And you're right. Ivy's hair comes out and it goes all the way down. It gives you that sense of scale. But you're right. I think what you said there is perfect. It doesn't take you out.
Right.
Even a character like the Joker, who has already exaggerated, like the manner of the character has exaggerated features, and you don't look at his super thin face, big long mouth, and none of that seems off.
Right.
None of that seems off. You're right. It never takes you out of the story. You just, it fits in the world he's created, and it makes sense,
Well, and if you look at like the way he draws Catwoman, up to that point, Catwoman was always drawn in such a way that it just seemed to be accentuating like her sexiness.
Yeah.
And when you look at the way he draws Catwoman, she has just as much musculature as Batman does. When and she's acrobatic, and it's he's not drawing just to draw in sort of the male gaze or whatever. Like, he's really giving her a sense of power in those panels where you're like, oh, she does look like she could take on Batman.
Yeah, it makes her actions believable, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if you're gonna like twirl backflip off a roof, you got to have the core muscles that that would require that that are required for that kind of movement.
Yeah, I mean, look at like gymnasts aren't rail thin.
Right.
Gymnasts have muscles, have the power to do that. Yeah. And then I wonder, the kind of a few years later, we get the kind of the Catwoman redesign, the version we see that Jim Lee draws in Hush, where it's no longer like the skin tight suit. It's a little more tactical. She has the goggles and all that. And I wonder if this was kind of an early, kind of not proof of concept, but just like, hey, we can draw her differently. She doesn't have to be like, she doesn't have to look like a cat, like that part of it. But yeah, there's meaning behind every character he draws. There's intention behind it. And I think that comes through. When you see these versions of these characters, again, they're early on in Batman's career, but they're so, they become iconic versions in terms of how they look. Again, I think that just comes down to the way that Sale draws his characters. He didn't draw them like anybody else. And it's cool to see him get to draw. I mean, what the full complement would have been in the early years of Batman. Obviously, he's got tons more now, but you think of the OG characters, the OG Rogues Gallery, they're all there. It's especially in that shot. It's got to be issue 10 or something like that near the end when Harvey's sitting in Bruce's desk and he's in shadow, and then you see everybody else, which is just that's such an incredible. Yeah, that's
it's
such
a beauty. I'm like looking at it right now because when you started mentioning it, I was like, I gotta
find it. It's such an incredible image of all those OG characters. Again, the way they quote unquote looked at the beginning, and just to get Loeb's take on that is so cool.
Well, and you just mentioned Harvey Dent Two-Face. I mean, this I think was the book that made him actually look terrifying and grotesque. It gave you that sort of sense that there was something, like you could look at that side of his face and you knew that something was deeply disturbed about him, because the way Sale draws it, I mean, it just looks so, it doesn't just look like comically sort of deformed or like, I mean, it looks like
Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It looks like Aaron Eckhart. I mean, they made it really burned away. Yeah. Right. It makes me wonder, like Sale probably would because of the way he draws characters, a little distorted, mostly, kind of thin and live. He probably could have been a really good horror book artist.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a small element of that. I mean, it's obviously the theme is very different, but so I have two thoughts on his art here. So like one, I think part of the reason every film since this book has come out that has Batman in it has been somewhat influenced by this is because it's so cinematic. Like the way he uses color or doesn't use color.
Which we should call out colorist Gregory Wright on this book here. And I've got notes on color. I think you're probably talking about anytime they go to
the black and white
killings and
the black and white and the it's like, and and the foreshadowing so early. But a foreshadowing with misdirection in issue 1, where you see the gun being loaded in like a 6-panel grid. And the 6th panel is the baby bottle tip. And then the next page is Barbara Gordon with a baby bottle tip as she's holding a baby, which it's like, okay, if you were even close to being on the trail, which there's no way you could in issue 1, you would then be thinking like, oh, it's, Barbara or Jim Gordon doing this. And it's like, oh, that was a real clue, but it's not the one you think it is.
Right.
But yeah, like when it cuts to the black and white scenes, and then I think about halfway through, he starts putting black and white action on the same page, like side by side with real time what's happening with the Riddler. And
Yeah, he
you know,
he does. Yeah, he does that well. And so this is one thing I wanted to bring up here, and I don't know if it falls under coloring specifically, but there's an intention as to when the page borders are either white or black. Anytime it goes monochrome, and we're seeing basically what the killer sees. Anytime there's one of the murders, and it goes monochrome, the edge of the pages go black. And that Riddler one, which is the April Fool's one, and it has kind of the half white, half black. You'll see that in terms of how the page borders are changed their colors. But it extends beyond that though as well. It's basically like any important scene, because one of the scenes that you called out last week, Mike, and it's a scene that Nolan has referenced. It's that first scene of Batman, Gordon, and Dent on the rooftop where they make their pact. Like we're gonna, which is
obviously
the
rules but not break them.
Yeah, it's a bedrock. It's a bedrock of the Dark Knight movie. Those pages, that meeting has a black border around. Like all the pages do, and so it's almost like they're signifying that this is something significant, something important, something to pay attention to. That there's a clue here, or something of that nature. And I just find that sort of intention, that sort of planning, is kind of a level beyond. And again, I don't know. I'm sure you can go and get a breakdown of every single page that has that and what are those panels on there. But it's one of those things that's notable that when it does go into that black border, there's something relevant to kind of the overall mystery of the book. Because ultimately, you said it's a detective story. This is a mystery book. And I think we'll come to that maybe later. I got a question for you guys about that as a mystery book. But anytime there's a significant thing or something that feels significant, I think you can kind of clock that and track that by looking at not the words, not the art, not the paneling, but tracking just based on what the outline of the page borders are. Are they white? Are they black? And that's one of those things that you just don't really see. I don't know how much thought goes into that. But there's clear intention in this book of which pages they wanted to do that in and which pages they didn't do it. So in my mind, that says it has to mean something. They had to put some thought into which ones were going to do it, and at least they probably have an internal reasoning as to why they did it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Next time you read this book, you're just going to be like analyzing that as you go.
It's a black border on this page. Let me see if I can figure out why.
Yeah, and then the border gets thinner on the black pages, right?
I don't know.
I
have the digital one pulled up on my screen.
I've got both. No, that it looks about the same. I don't know.
Maybe
looks
about the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's probably for
printing,
that's probably just regular printing purposes. Yeah.
Right.
But in terms of, when they go to it and all that, but yeah, it looks about the same. But yeah, I'm looking at both here. I have both the digital up and my trade version.
So, before we start, breaking down our thoughts on the story, and I know you have some thought about where this falls, but this is what I found curious, and this was updated on Wikipedia very recently because it's in the same paragraph where they're talking about the Long Halloween, the last Halloween that comes out September 2024. But it says the Long Halloween continues the story of Batman Year One for the characters of Batman, Gordon, Catwoman, Falcone, and is considered to replace earlier effort of Batman Year Two in the character's continuity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so after Year One, like that makes sense, because it's like, this is essentially, I think you said it this way last week, Alex, which is like, all the villains here, this is like them going from being villains to being super villains.
Yeah.
Like that, you're seeing the transformation of these characters. So it's like, it would have to be very early in his career for that to be the case. And the other thing is, for me, I read this as one of the first graphic novel trade paperback things I ever read. And I was chasing this high. And, I asked people like, what are other Batman books to read? And the next one that someone gave me was Hush, which is a great book, but you open that and within like 3 pages, he's in like an all-out brawl with a giant lizard, or it's a Killer Croc.
Killer Croc, yeah, I believe. Yep.
But it's like that's a completely different. There aren't those type of villains in here. Like these are all just like all the villains are
Well,
slightly exaggerated versions of street level.
they're Grundy's here, so
Grundy is here, but
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but he just gives them a Thanksgiving meal. It's really nice.
Eventually, yeah,
I would
he's
say
hungry.
Poison Ivy is the most like out there
Yeah.
of the ones here,
Yeah.
especially with like her power set and her, leaf multiplication, her photosynthesis in the very dark world of Tim Sale. I don't know how it's possible, but yeah,
Now,
it just felt a lot less grounded, and I was like, okay, there are lots of good different types of Batman stories. I'm not saying like the Long Halloween is the like you have to be this grounded, you have to be this way, but it's a very particular vibe, and when you finish the Long
Yeah.
Halloween, you want more of that vibe.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Mike. So I'm and you, Drew, as well. Have either of you read Batman Year Two? What was considered Batman Year Two? Like it because
No, I just
they
heard it was
had
trash, and I
well,
didn't read it.
it's not great. I mean, but they did it in the same way as Year One. It was. I'm pretty sure it was. It's called. I think they did a couple of things like Year Two dash other stories, but the actual Year Two story, I believe it ran in Detective.
Yeah. Yes, it
Um,
did. Yeah.
yeah, it ran a detective. And I think it was 4 issues again. And it was again it was meant to be this kind of follow up of what happens next. And and there is a Batman Year Three, which is back in continuity now, but Batman Year Three is basically the introduction of Tim Drake, which is very
Right.
strange. That means he's gone
Yes.
through both Dick and Jason by then.
Yeah.
So that's never
It's
really
a
never
very
really made
short
sense.
timeline for those first 2 years. Yeah.
Well, yes, I mean, the sliding time scale weirdly works better at Marvel than it does at DC at some point, because like you think about everything that the character of like Dick Grayson has gone through in
Mhm.
like 8 years or something like that. He's supposed to be Robin, Nightwing, Batman, Nightwing, Agent 37, Nightwing again, and then
Mhm.
loses memory and come. It's very that happens in like 8 years of his life or something like that. It's very ridiculous. But yeah, so this coming in and kind of usurping that,
Yeah.
it makes sense. And I think I said it maybe at some point last week that canon is what people consider good. It's what people like.
Yeah.
So the thing that's canon is the thing that people like and want more of. And
Yeah.
the next writer comes back to him and says, you know what, I like that. I'm gonna continue that story, thus making that original story canon now. So, it's a fluid thing. But you're probably not going to find Batman Year Two trade anywhere, but you're definitely going to find Long Halloween. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, in
that's
how
what wins
many
out.
printings now?
Yeah.
Um,
Populism wins out in that case.
Yeah, well, that and like honestly, I'm shocked that DC hasn't taken the free money associated with doing like a 20th, 25th anniversary reprint of each single issue of this series, because I think it would sell. Because like the individual covers are so beautiful.
I was going to say, speaking
And
of those individual issues, and we were talking about the artwork, if I mean, I know it's so easy to go buy a trade, but if you have the ability to buy the individual issues,
Yeah.
the covers for these are, in my opinion, probably the best set of covers I would say of any series that I've seen. It's at least it's up there. They are just absolutely
well, and I
it's
have a
artwork.
question
It's
about
artwork.
the covers. Like, so, like, what I love about Loeb is that he or Sale, sorry, Sale is that he injects some of the story and like whatnot into the static image, which I think I mentioned it last week. The fact that Sale was doing all the variants for Tom King's run for like the first 20,
Yeah.
30 issues. But he wasn't just doing like, oh, it's a random Batman thing that I might have drawn 25 years ago. He was depicting Gotham and Gotham Girl, which were new characters, and to me made them feel like long established canon, even though we were just meeting them,
Yeah.
because it was done in sales artwork. And I was like, oh, that it fits in my mind with the Gambit, like the Rogues Gallery for Batman. But here for like issues 8 and 9, I love this because it's Mother's Day and you see young boy Bruce at Martha's grave. And then issue 9 is Father's Day and you see Batman in full costume at Thomas Wayne's grave. And I'm like, okay, well, was that actually just a cool trick, or was it saying like, he grieved his mom as a child and now as an adult, he grieves his father more, and he's trying to do the work of his father. I was like, I don't know if there's anything to make out of his cover choices, or whether it was just a cool symmetry. They look cool side by side, which if that's all it is, still works for me. Take my money.
Yeah, if that's all it is, that's absolutely worth it. I always looked at it as the Mother's Day cover was, every boy's first love is their mother. And so he sees himself as a young boy still. And when it came to the father, it was every boy wants his father to be proud of him. And so it was, sort of Batman standing in front of Thomas Wayne, like, look what I've done it, Dad. Like, look what I've done. Those two things, I'm glad you brought that up, because those two, I don't know whether it was on purpose or not, but that's what I always took from it.
Or
That's
is it that
That's a great read.
Bruce Wayne is the child of Martha, but Batman is the child of Thomas?
I mean,
That's a good, yeah.
I think it's a combination of all that, right? Because Bruce is all, his stance against crime and all that, against all of that is him feeling like he's doing what his father did, just in a different way. And so I love that read, Drew. You said basically like he's looking for approval. That's why he's standing there, and Batman is like, did I make the right choice? Is this right?
Yeah.
And seeing young Bruce Wayne at his mother's grave, I think that goes back to that initial childhood trauma of he feels like this is his fault.
Yeah.
Because of going to see the movie, cutting through crime alley, things of that nature. You mean the cover, and it's interesting. You point out those two covers because those actually have like backgrounds and landscapes,
right?
Versus
right.
Which is actually,
I mean, minimal
for
but
these,
yeah,
but it's anomalous for this series.
Yeah.
Because they're very minimalist. They're very negative space. Typically the solid color in the background with character or an image in the front.
Right.
Somehow related in general to the month/holiday that is depicted in that issue. And they're absolutely, they're gorgeous covers. This was something that when I came to it, I read it in trade, the trade I had before me here. I had to track them down.
Yeah.
I had to track them down. And I have this weird thing. If I'm looking for a long run, anything that's over like 8 issues or something like that, if I see it at a shop or something like that, I don't buy it unless I can get at least half of it at once.
Yeah.
Don't ask me why. I feel like if I can get half of it now, then
just
it's
one
easier.
of those things.
It launches the quest, right? It's like, yes, I accept the quest.
It's
like
like
in a video game.
I'm over 50%. So now I can spend as long as it takes me to get the rest of them. But I know I've got the majority of it. So that's just how my mind works.
Well,
and
especially if like the first issue's in that first half run.
Well,
And for me, it's that I can't buy them.
spots.
I can't buy them out of order. That's like my weird thing.
Whoa.
Is like if I find
Oh.
I find issues like 4 and 9, I'm like, I can't buy these right now because I don't have issues 3 and 5 or whatever. It's weird. I know.
Gosh, so what you're telling me is you only own like 30 comics.
The eternal quest goes on.
Yeah. But no, I found these at a shop. I don't even know where I was. I think I found 8 of them. So like someone had either cherry picked some of them out there. So I found like 8 of them once. Like, well, I'm going to buy these right now. And then once I have that quest set, it's like now every shop I go to, I'm looking for the last 5 that I missed. Like I have to get these now. I can't. It's just like, oh, if I happen to buy a shop, like, no, I'm going to go to shops now. I'm going to hunt these last 5 down. And I think I might have broken up a set too. Like a shop had all of them, and I picked like 2 of them out that I kind of felt bad about that. At the same time, I was like, if they really want to keep together, they would have bundled them together and sold it as a set or something like that.
Well, let me ask you a weird question. This is on the same topic, but off topic. So if you're hunting, because I addressed this I've got an upcoming podcast that's going to launch in a couple of weeks, but one of the things we talked about was if you're hunting for something, will you only pick it up in the wild or will you order off eBay?
Okay. So here's the thing. In the area that the 3 of us happen to live in, which is Southwest Ohio, Greater Cincinnati area, I live just north of the city. And if I drive about 45, 50 minutes, if I take a 45, 50-minute radius around my house, there are about 2 dozen comic book shops. And that doesn't include used bookstores and flea markets. I will visit all of them before I go to like my comic shop. And if I can't find it there, then I'll go to eBay.
Good man.
Unless I'm going to a con and there's an issue I absolutely want and I can't get it, and
Yeah,
it's like
there's urgency.
yeah, if it's a specific urgency, then I will order stuff from online. But
Gotcha.
I will take an entire Saturday, and I've done this plenty where leave first thing. The first things that open, comic shops open a little later on the weekends, maybe like 11, 12, 9, 10 o'clock. There's some flea markets that have back issues. I'll go there and I'll spend all day driving around. I'll put 200 miles in my car in a day and come home when I have like 4 comic books. And it'd be like,
I like that. I appreciate that. That's good because there's something about finding them in the wild that is just absolutely
1000%. Yeah.
So, all right.
And also, I don't, I said I don't like. I want to walk in and I appreciate anytime the person who works there is friendly, is like, hey, what you looking for? Can I help with anything? And the stubborn part of me is like, no, I'm good. Just I'm gonna go to these back issues and I'm gonna look. If I can't find it, I can't find it.
Ron Swanson at Home Depot. You're like, I know more than you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm not saying I don't know more than you, but it's like I want to go through the books. I want to find it. Like if I'm like, hey, do you have Long Halloween 8 and 9? And he's like, oh, he walks over here and he pulls them out. It's like, well, there goes the hell. There goes that small bit of excitement when you're flipping through, like, okay, they got some Long Halloween here, and you're flipping through and you're like, it's like 3, 4, 5, 10. Oh, damn it. Or if they do have, there's that little bit of dopamine rush when you find the thing that you have there. So yeah, I turn down help from the shop owners. I appreciate it when it happens, but I was polite, but I want to pull it out of the box. And that's part of,
and when you're flipping through like the long boxes, and you're like, Batman Long Halloween, there it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep flipping. There's the one I needed. I was like that with Saga for a long time, which I now have everything I'm gonna get for Saga. I have, which is to say everything except a first printing of #1.
Yeah, I've got a second printing of #1, but I got it signed by BKV, so I'm happy for that. And I don't. Ooh. A first printing. I mean, hell, finding a first printing of Saga 1 that's not graded and slabbed, because I personally don't buy graded and slab stuff. Right. So like trying to find one that isn't graded or slabbed is like nigh impossible. So but yeah, that's part of the hobby is it's not like I need to read the book. I don't think I've ever read my single issues of Long Halloween, because I have it digitally. I have the trade. If I want to reread it, if I want to reread it, I'll always go digitally because it's right there on the tablet. Yeah. So I don't know if I've ever actually read those issues of some of those books that I've hunted down because I want to have in single issue.
You've read it. Yeah, I mean, how many times? Okay, so let's just go around the circle and confess. How many times have you read this book, Alex?
I might be near 10.
Okay.
I might be near 10 or 11. Yeah.
True.
I would say I'm right at 10 or 11, because this usually becomes one of my yearly reads. Like I have a stack of about 5 graphic novels that I feel I have to revisit each year, and so typically this one is on that list.
Yeah. If I'm going to a Batman story, I'll read this.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll read Dark Victory. But if I read Dark Victory, then I got to read Catwoman. So like, but this is one that it's not quite yearly for me, but maybe every other year. It's one I just go back to, and sometimes, as we've praised Tim Sale enough, but this is one of those books that you can almost read without reading any of the dialogue. You don't have to read any of the words. This is where you can just get what you need from the artwork. And I've definitely gone through that time at times where I'll flip through it on the tablet, something nice, bright, high resolution, and just stare at the panels. And so I count that as a reread, even though, because at this point I know what's going on. I don't need to read the words.
Right. You're not reading the words necessarily, but you are picking up new stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I think that's what constitutes a reread for me, is like, so full disclosure, I was like really pinched for time in the last week. We started recording at 8 p.m. At 6:30 p.m. I sat down outside with a cigar and a seltzer water and just binged this book in 90 minutes, and came up with like 20 minutes to spare, because and I was like looking at it on my tablet, which is the deluxe edition, because I didn't want my my physical one to get all smelly. I don't care if I'm all smelly, but the book, no. And it said like 348 pages. I'm like, that is the shortest 348 pages, or 386. But I didn't read all the deluxe stuff in the back, which is probably accounts for 50 pages or so.
But on a reread, you can do that. I think if you're picking this up for the first time, it is a pretty dense book, because I think you are engrossed in what the mystery is, in terms of, it's a whodunit. It's a classic whodunit. And I think the way that Loeb has it structured in terms of his dialogue, because this is actually a bit of in terms of the books that we're going to be talking about, I mentioned last week, Loeb, for the most part, became, as he got more into his comic writing career, he became kind of obsessed with narration boxes and internal monologue. So whether a book is written from the main character's point of view and you get his thoughts, or you're getting another character's point of view writing about the main character, it's almost all narration. There's still dialogue, but it's very word heavy on getting the inner thoughts of the characters and what they're thinking, what they're doing, and all that. This book doesn't have that. This book is much more straightforward, but there's still a lot of dialogue. And if you're going through for the first time, it's pretty beefy. I mean, it's 13 prestige issues. I think they're all slightly oversized, because they're all perfect bound, square bound. So I think they're like 32 issues. So maybe it's like 10 extra pages from a regular story. So you're getting just a little bit extra each time. And it's 13 issues. That's a lot,
But there's no filler in it. I mean, that's the thing that makes it feel so fast to me.
You're right. It's all story relevant. It's all narrative relevant in terms of the information you need to know to fully engage with the mystery of it. On that note, how do you guys feel about the mystery? And again, if you're listening to this, we assuming you've read the book, and so we can't spoil anything about the ending. But how do you feel about the way the mystery was deployed? The various, Mike, you already called out an early fake out, misdirection. How do you feel that played out, and how do you feel about the ultimate end of who the holiday killer actually was? At different points in the story, how did you feel the mystery played out as to the audience, to the reader?
Well, I think as someone who, I think the first time I read this, I was not into like mystery novels, and in the last 2 years, when a man reaches a certain age, just starts reading mysteries. And
mysteries or westerns, one or the other.
Yeah, I was like, pick your, whether that or you're smoking meat in the backyard.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I've read a lot of mysteries in the last 2 years, and like some of them are kind of like meta mysteries where they're deconstructing, like they're very consciously deconstructing Agatha Christie's like mystery formula as like kind of the master of mysteries. And I think this one like holds up very well. I remember the first time I read this feeling like the ending was somewhat open-ended and ambiguous, like they were leading you to think it was her, but it was like, well, maybe she just found her husband's stuff and she was burning it to like protect Harvey. And each time I've read it, it seems more and more definitive. And then to watch the 2-part film adaptation a few years ago, where they put too fine a point on it and then also changed it, which I don't know if you guys even watched the animated version.
I didn't.
But, basically, they come right out and say like, they were like, it was Gilda all along, but she doesn't get away with it. Like as she's burning the things, Batman shows up in the basement.
Okay.
Confronts her.
I remember that.
Is, she's like, are you going to turn me in? And he just walks away and you don't know. So they added a different kind of ambiguity, which was like kind of a nice twist on its own. But to me, it's like gilding the lily. It's like, this was already the perfect ending, in my opinion. And it didn't need that extra twist. But, it was so smart because she had her own reasons, her own motives, which are slowly revealed throughout the course of the book. There are so many misdirections because it's crime families, right? It's like you think you're reading The Godfather and that it's just obviously the rival family, working through something, or there's like a traitor in the family who's gone over to the other family. Then you think, well, there's all these, supervillains around. It's got one of these supervillains is probably involved. What the fact that it takes them till like issue 3 to go visit Calendar Man when these things are clearly lining up with the calendar, like world's greatest detective, or is he's not yet reached world's greatest detective? But
which I did love the fact that Calendar Man sort of plays the Hannibal Lecter in this series.
That illusion,
that's brilliant.
There's so much Godfather there in this story, like overt references, but him, the the fact that he gets the big clear plexiglass window.
Right.
You walk through Arkham, we see some of that, and it's the same kind of like wooden doors with the three iron bars for a
Right.
window.
It's like
But
a Looney Tunes cartoon.
yeah, but you're right. Calendar Man gets the big plexiglass window where you can see into the room, and he's standing there, and it's so Hannibal Lecter coded. You're
Yeah.
totally right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know who keeps giving him these paper calendars, like the daily ones that he can like his floor is just covered with them. I'm like, I feel like they could at least like buy him like the last year's one and like the kitten calendar on clearance just to like stick it to him a little bit.
Right.
I mean, but,
yeah.
no, but he would know. I think you give him a calendar. Maybe that's how you keep him sedated. You don't got to drug him. Then.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
At some point, you're just encouraging this behavior.
Yeah.
Maybe that's cool and unusual.
Yeah.
So anyway, for me, like I consider it first and foremost like a mystery detective piece, and it totally works. And this is what Nolan said about The Dark Knight was that when award season came around, we all knew it was going to like get a bunch of nominations, and he was like, "Well, I don't even think it should be considered a superhero movie. It should be considered like a crime thriller."
Yeah.
And people were like, "Right, but he is dressed like a bat.
It's got Batman in it.
It's like he is still wearing a big bat costume, and the fact that your source material is so transparently comic books, it is a comic book movie. I understand what he's saying. Like, I think someone who doesn't know anything about comics, doesn't know anything about Batman, would go enjoy The Dark Knight, and in the same way, I think they would enjoy this.
Yeah,
I think higher likelihood, definitely.
Yeah. So, what do you guys think? How does the mystery hold up after this many rereads?
I mean, from the first time I read it, I can remember thinking to myself, like, man, this is taking me down all kinds of rabbit trails. Like, it was like the script for it was so well laid out. The story was so seamless, in my opinion, that it really did kind of have me guessing all along. And I think the rereadability of it is one of the things that makes it one of those perfect books, because Alex was saying before, like, every time you go back to it, you find something new, something sticks out, whether it's a panel, whether it's a piece of dialogue that you just didn't really think about before. I think the rereadability of it is just, it's one of those rare books that you can keep going back to, because I think the story is so well told. I mean, Loeb and Sale together absolutely just paint this picture, whether it's through the dialogue, whether it's through the artwork. To me, this is the quintessential Batman. This is, if I was going to be on a desert island, someone's like, all right, you get to take one Batman book. What's it going to be? Like, for me, it would be Long Halloween, because this is everything I think I want from Batman. And I think that's why we see such inspiration taken from it for these movies, for these directors, is that it has this lasting effect on people, because this is the Dark Knight. I mean, this is the detective. This is and I think you were saying before, Mike, how, like, you get to Hush and you get to these other books, and they're pretty extravagant. There's all kinds of things going on, and way over the top action sequences. And I know specifically from like a lot of the Rebirth stuff, I mean, it was like, there's just, he's got cars that are basically Transformers and all this kind of stuff, which is great. Look, all of that is Batman. But for me, when it comes to this particular story, it can't be beat. And I think that's why we keep seeing it used as inspiration for things. In terms of, like, the mystery, you were saying, yeah, it's a little ambiguous. That's the thing about it. I still go back and forth as to, like, okay, I'm like, all right, if Gilda's the first holiday, and Alberto's in there too, but then I know a lot of people are like, no, Harvey Dent he did, but for me, the one thing I think that sticks out about this story, or one of the many things, is that we get to see this true tragedy of Harvey Dent.
Yeah.
Like, this is the first time on page we really get to see it. I mean, I know it's been out there, but this was like the first time that they really spent some time on his origin. And I don't know. I think I have a hard time believing that Harvey has this dark side where he's killing people before he descends into the madness of Two-Face.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's just this ambiguity
Yeah.
that I love, because even to this day, I'm like, it was definitely Gilda and Harvey and Alberto. And then I'm like, I don't know. I think it lessens the tragedy of Harvey Dent if he's a killer before he becomes
Exactly. Yeah.
Two-Face.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's this, I love it. I
It means
absolutely love
it means his character has already fallen.
Right.
When the story
outside
is
just
about
now matches the inside.
yeah.
Right.
I like what you
Absolutely.
said. Like we said earlier about what the first time you read it, and I agree. I can remember the first time I read it, trying to solve it. Like as you're going, even though I knew that was fruitless because I knew we were going to get to the end there. But but trying to solve it, and the rereadability thing is, and I recall this specifically when I finished. I read this twice the first night I had it, because you read it once, you get to the end, and then you have to go back and read it with those new eyes. And the thing that it reminded me of was the first time I saw The Usual Suspects,
Yeah.
which is a movie we're going to spoil right now.
Kaiser
It was
Soze,
Kevin Spacey's character. It was
Right.
he's Kaiser Soze. So get over it. But you watch that, you get to the end, and like that's a jaw drop moment, because that movie is so well written that you have to then go back and watch the movie again with the future knowledge, so you can try and it gives you the movie in a completely different light. And I think this book works that way, even though the end is ambiguous the way it's meant to be. You get to the end, and because at that point you see character motivation, and so whether or not how many of the kills Alberto was involved in, once you see what he has done at the end, you then have to go back to the beginning and see who that character was, how he was treated by the rest of the family, how he saw them. You read that character completely differently, knowing that in the end, he at least killed some of them.
Yeah.
Or attempted to. So
and it's like, well, was he copycatting a known thing to try to mask himself, or was she copycatting him? And and like the first thing you learn about him, like literally the first thing I think is like Bruce's like little internal assessment. It's like, here he is, Harvard MBA or something. It was like, maybe not MBA, but it was Harvard University. And it was like, oh yeah, he's a clever guy. Like, but regardless of what program he was in, if you're at Harvard, you did something academically impressive at some point in your life. Harvard MBA, Oxford Rhodes Scholar. So it's like, Rhodes Scholar.
He's Michael Corleone. He's the guy that comes back who's not in the family, and, we mentioned The Godfather a bunch here. And I mean, reading it again this time, the first page is, I believe in Gotham City. Like, that's the first line of The Godfather. I believe in America. Like, there are, it starts at a family wedding, right? So an Italian family wedding. What's Harvey, our first meeting of Harvey Dent? He's in the parking lot. He's writing down license plates. Like that's a scene directly out of the opening. Like that's the opening 10 minutes of The Godfather right there. Like that, and the scene when one of the bosses is murdered, and his son is there, like cradling him, like that's Fredo on the sidewalk after Vito gets shot. Like there's so many allusions to that. And it's if you're gonna ape a story, like The Godfather's pretty good one to take. But reading it, the more I read it, and because you can watch The Godfather's probably playing right now. Whenever you're listening to this, it's probably playing on cable right now. It's on so much, and I've seen it so much more now than 20 years ago when I first read this book. Some of those things jump out to me, but it's taking that crime story, those tropes, those ideas, and it's using them specifically. I think even at one point, like one of the mobsters is like they shot at me, like in my house, or my kids, like again, that's directly out of Godfather 2. That's what Pacino says. And it is there are so many of those allusions there. And it's almost like, I have to imagine when creators pay homage to things like that, like they want the reader to bring that knowledge in, right? They want that to inform the reading experience. It's almost like if you haven't seen The Godfather and you read this, you don't lose anything, but they're creating this with that knowledge already existing. And so if you bring that into the book, I think they are meaning for it to enhance your reading experience. They're relying on their reader audience to know what these references are, so they can point to that. Like they can be the Leo pointing at the screen meme because they want that. They want people to think about the stereotypical mob family.
And it can also be used as a redirect, right? I mean, like you pull those things in, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, so we know the killer is definitely one of the crime family. You know what I mean? Like, because you're pulling these things in, it's informing your way that you're reading it.
Yeah, you're expecting that. You're expecting. Yeah, I think what you said. It's obviously not the rival family because that's too obvious.
Right.
You know, everyone who's getting killed is associated with one of the crime families. So it obviously has to be someone on the inside. And so when we get to Alberto and he's in like the double arm cast and he's like, I'm Holiday Killer. And you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. He did all this. And then you get to the end, you're like, wait, but how could he have done all of them? He couldn't, you know, so that there, again, we flow back into that idea of the ambiguous ending, but the setup, because it's scripted so well, because it's plotted so well. It lends itself to that rereadability quality of just, it doesn't matter if you know the end, because there are so many twists and turns. There's so many things going on there that you're engaged all the time, every time you go into it. There's something there to keep you and to grab, for you to grab hold to.
Also, can we talk about this rule of they'll bend the law but not break it? Do you know it's 10 years in federal prison to burn U.S. currency? I think that was a pretty smart. It was kind of a smart reappropriation by Nolan to have the Joker be the one to burn the mafia money.
Yeah, to use that. Yeah.
And I didn't love that it's like the first issue that Harvey is like, that's a lot of money. If we were two other guys, it'd be pretty easy. And it's like, okay, a lot of things in my head here. One, I want like the sparkling white Harvey Dent, you know, before his fall from grace. I want him to be squeaky clean. On the other hand, it's really easy for Batman to say like, oh yeah, we'll just burn that money. It doesn't even matter. Like, you're talking to the richest man in the world,
right?
Dressed like
he's
a
like
bat.
He's like, that's like what, 0.5% of my net worth. Yeah,
right.
Like that's in my couch right now. You know.
Right. Well, technically, Bruce's became worth more when all that burnt. It just took a few million out of circulation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, very human moment.
But I think I know you want to see that perfect Harvey Dent, but the idea that
but it would have been unrealistic, frankly.
Yeah, he is noble intention, but like he's still human, you know.
Yeah,
it's like in Training Day, right? If you find $50,000 in a drug stash house and you turn in 40,000, like 40,000 still a lot in a like
right.
You can justify very easily like, what difference does that make? We made a bust on a drug house, you know.
Yeah.
The money's in evidence here, but like if you pocket 10 grand or something like that, you know, like that's a very short step. I think if you're in that line of work, it's a very short step to take to justify. So yeah, it'd have been unrealistic. You're right. If Harvey was just like, oh no, I can't, I'm way too noble for that. You know, I can't, I would never think about that. That wouldn't track.
And it was also set up a great, I mean, I think that's what I like about Nolan. Like Nolan captured like the essence. He loved the three of them on the rooftop together. And so he just straight off ripped that off.
Yeah.
But he loved like the money burning in the warehouse scene and like, you know, the mafia not being able to use the banks anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So them having to pile it all up. He took that, he changed it a little bit. He also took a courtroom scene where a mobster has snuck in a weapon and pulls it on Harvey. But because I think people who read this book when they were watching Dark Knight probably thought a vat of acid is coming out of that thing, out of that guy's jacket when he reaches in.
I thought I did. Yeah.
And instead you get the, if you want to kill a public servant, I recommend you buy American.
Yeah.
An incredible line.
Carbon fiber gun.
Yeah.
No,
well, and I think that's what these great Batman stories that I know the three of us have all read time and time again, one of the best things about them is that they humanize some of those characters. You know, they humanize Harvey Dent. When you look at Batman Year One and you see this very human side of Jim Gordon, who, you know, has sort of, you know, in modern comics sort of become the White Knight, you know, and, you know, in Year One, he's having an affair and he's, you know, all these different things. I think the best Batman stories are the ones where they humanize a lot of the characters, and you know, Batman becomes such a juxtaposition of that. Like, no, we can't do this. We can't, you know, I won't cross that line. You know, everybody else can do that. Everybody else can bend the line, whatever, but I can't cross that line. I think all the best Batman stories do that really, really well.
Yeah, the one I think of immediately is from the started originated in the animated series, which is Heart of Ice, which is
Oh
the
gosh,
Mr.
yeah.
Freeze one, and it takes that character, which had always been fairly ridiculous, the guy in the
Right.
giant glass helmet when the freeze gun, and you make the story about him and his wife,
Yeah.
and it was so popular in the animated series that they just port that over, and that's now his canonical backstory.
Yeah.
You know, because it was so good, and it changes everything you think about Victor Freeze.
Yeah.
You know, by putting that in there, he's still, you know, I mean, at this point in his story, he's not specifically a bad guy anymore, but throughout his time there, you're right, you understood him more, and that idea of, I think, trying to humanize your villain, so they're not just, you know, mild, you know, just you know, maniacal and
Yeah.
just one track. It fleshes out a story, and in a lot of ways, Long Halloween is Harvey Dent's story.
Yeah.
Like you know, he is your protagonist, I guess. The story is about him.
Yeah.
In kind of a manner of speaking.
Yeah. So, like the other thing that I want to talk about is, and I don't know the history of like comics too far before this, aside from like, you know, I've read some like, you know, I've read like the old Detective 27 and like some older Batman stories, but it seems like Loeb and Sale, and I'm saying both of their names intentionally here, really unlock a next level of like psychoanalysis of characters that is like, now it's like a bad comic if you don't do that. Like, I think everyone is psychoanalyzing these characters. It's also something that just happens when a character's been around long enough and you feel like there's no new stories, and it's like, you know, we need to find a new angle. But I think you get into Batman's psyche, you get into Catwoman's psyche, you certainly get into like Harvey and Gilda's, and less so Jim and Barbara. I mean, Jim, this is not like an iconic Jim Gordon story in my mind. Like, it's where I get my impression of Jim Gordon.
He's
I was gonna say,
of the three, if we talk about that trinity of characters, he definitely has the least amount to do. And he gets like,
and he's kind of the hall monitor for the two of them, right?
He really is. Yeah. He gets the least amount of shine in the story. But he doesn't go on an arc. Batman goes on an arc.
Yes.
Harvey goes on an arc. Jim does not in this story.
That's the way to say
it. In a lot of ways, Drew, what you mentioned, Year One is is more of a Jim Gordon story than Long Halloween is.
I think that this story, more than anything, sort of just solidified the kind of character that Jim Gordon was going to be for the next however many years. You know, because this is kind of the same Jim Gordon we see from here on out, is sort of this, you know, tried and true ally of Batman, you know, defending Batman.
He's already used to Batman disappearing on him. Like,
right.
He understands the rhythm of
exactly
of what we see there. Yeah, no, I think that's probably right in terms of, you know, where the temperament of Jim Gordon we see most often now.
And I think kind of the moral purity of him, because like you're saying, in Year One, he was a little more of a gray character, and I think they were like, you know, and again, like, so my thing was, I finished reading this book with 20 minutes to spare before the podcast, and I thought, how much of Dark Knight can I watch, you know, in 20 minutes? Like, where would I start if I was just gonna binge 20 minutes, just because like I need my fix after,
like, the bank heist scene
book.
Is like 15 minutes, right? The opening scene,
right,
which is spectacular, but that's like, that whole thing's like about 15 minutes right there from rooftop to school bus.
So that it was like, if I could get like even just go rewatch that rooftop scene initially, because like Nolan clearly saw, okay, Batman is the Dark Knight, Harvey's the White Knight, and Jim is like, the captain here. He's calling the shots. He's keeping them both above board about everything.
Yeah.
And then there's like a scene in the movie where like, Harvey is about to compromise and like, beat someone who's wearing the Rachel Dawes name tag.
Yeah.
And Batman is the one who like stops him and intervenes, and it like feels a little wrong. It's like, well, this is Jim's job. Like, this is and Batman shouldn't be having to follow Harvey around to keep him in line.
Well, that's why I love that dynamic, is because Harvey is suspicious of Batman and Batman is suspicious of Harvey. So Jim Gordon has to be the go-between the two of them, really, because
they both trust him implicitly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, and I think you see that in the story here when, because, at one point, Batman straight up accuses Harvey. He's like, he lays the evidence out and it's like, it's got to be Harvey. And it's Jim who's like, you really think Harvey could do, like, he's the one that is pushing back on that. And Bruce is just like, all the evidence points this way. And so thus the natural conclusion, the only conclusion is that Harvey is the holiday killer. And it's Jim who has a better read of the person, of like, this isn't what Harvey would do. Like, this isn't, he sees beyond. It's that cop's sixth sense, right? Of like, everything's lining up here. There's the evidence. But like, the superhero cops are the ones that they look at the evidence, but also go with their gut, and you start seeing that with Jim Gordon here, that there's something a little extra in how he does his job, how he executes his job. That makes him stand out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's, lost what I was going to say. It was, about Jim. Yeah. It's gone.
Yeah. I'll come back.
It'll circle back. But yeah, this is, it's not, I think, where we had started was not an iconic Jim story, but Jim is an immovable figure of this story.
Yeah.
Which makes he's an anchor.
He's a pillar of the story. I mean, you need all three of them. But again, the fact that he doesn't go on an arc, he's simply there. I think Hall Monitor is pretty good. Like, he is meant to be the go-between. He is what both characters, Harvey and Batman, he's the person they bounce ideas off. So he's there to be kind of a reflective mirror. So one thing I did want to mention here, because we haven't said his name yet, and we like to cover all these, Drew, when we talk about the stories, is the letterer here. It's credited as Comicraft / Richard Starkings, and I think Starkings letters all the books that we're going to cover for Loeb and Sales. Well, I think he did a lot of Loeb's work there.
Yeah.
But one thing I like what he's done here. There's not a whole lot to his lettering, but all the dialogue is in all caps, and then all of the narration boxes are in mixed case. Which I like those kind of like mini little distinctions there. I like that you can clearly see when things are bolded. It's very clean. We're not kind of in the realm of really kind of experimental lettering where they're doing a lot of I don't want to say crazy stuff, but a lot of inventive stuff. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. But it's very clean, very easy to read, and I like the differentiation there, because it makes you feel like the narration boxes are like a journal, like they're handwritten. They're someone's thoughts, So the fact that it's mixed case, the way that someone might typically write, we're using upper and lowercase letters versus just the standard dialogue, which is just all uppercase. I like those kind of small touches like that.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it shows intentionality, and if there's one thing about this book, I think, is that it's absolutely well-rounded. So whether you're talking about the art or the story or the panel layouts or the lettering, I mean, it just all seems it all seems so intentional. And it to me, it really is a love letter to Batman. I mean, because you're a big comic book reader, and I'm sure you've read thousands more comics than I have, but I mean, as well as I do, there are projects out there, there are series out there, there are things out there that really just slack on the small things. And when they slack on the small things, it kind of takes you out of what they're trying to do. And so, it really is something as simple as the lettering. I mean, I actually never even really picked that up till you just mentioned it, and I had to look at it. I was like, oh yeah, you're right. The everything is in caps in the dialogue box or in the dialogue, and everything in the uh story boxes are mixed. Those are just the little details I think that show how much passion went into this book in particular. That and that everything is just crisp. Like if there's one thing
Yeah.
you can take away from the lettering in this book, it's absolutely crisp. There's not too much going on in one dialogue box versus like you just get this really nice smooth transition and everything is really crisp.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good word. It's very clean.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's not obtrusive. Again, uh Loeb isn't someone who writes a ton of dialogue, so you're not getting like the Bendis thing where the
Right.
art is designed to have 45 word balloons back and forth because but
Yeah.
they're not obscuring art because the panel is laid out that way, but you're not having that rapid back and forth of
Correct. Yeah.
characters. Loeb doesn't write that way. There isn't kind of an economy of language, and so it leads to a very clean, say crisp is a great word, look on the page. It makes it very easy to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which there are sometimes there are some fonts and I don't know, a thing a lot of people don't notice a lot often is the lettering, but there are some fonts that some books use that it's like some letters look the same.
Yeah.
I total random tangent, but the one that always jumps out at me, I loved the Spider-Gwen book that Marvel did, but the font they used was a little stylized and the D's and the P's looked the same. In terms of like the stem on a P below the loop was like, like an eighth of a millimeter
Yeah.
big.
Negligible. Yeah.
It was so small that you read through it and which is tough when you're trying to spell the word spider a lot, which has both those letters in it.
Yeah.
But it's little things like that. It's like maybe you could have made us a little different choice
Right.
on the lettering, to kind of clean that up. And you're right. It's a thing that you're not supposed to notice, I guess.
Right.
You're supposed to internalize it, and if you do notice it, usually it means that an incorrect choice was made because it stands out.
And now that you mention it, like it should stand out because of how clean it is. When I think about books, like one of my favorites that I always go back to reading each year is Superman Red Sun. I really dig that book. It's just a lot of fun. But reading through that sometimes is a nightmare because the letters are so smashed together that it almost and the word there's just not good spacing between the words or the letters, and so you get this almost sort of a jumble in each box. And it really does take you out of it because you're trying to read through it, but you're like, I got rereading the same bubble, it's like, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that kind of thing does affect the reader's experience.
That's the curse of being a letterer. You only get noticed if it's done poorly.
Yeah.
I mean, and when it's smooth,
Yeah.
you're just gliding along, not even thinking about it. And as soon as it's bad, it's like, who was asleep on the job this day?
Yeah. And anytime you have a book that has multiple fonts for whatever reason, it should be seamless as you're reading it. And again, the whole idea is you're internalizing, that, a book that Mike and I talked about previously was Descender and Ascender. And depending on who was talking, whether it's a human or a robot or whatever it is, the font changed, the shape of the bubbles changed. And it's one of those things that you're not supposed to point out as you're reading it, but you just know that when it's subconscious as you're reading it, that when you see it, like, oh, I know who this character is or what this character is, simply because I see how their dialogue is being shown on the page. And you just go through it, and by the time you get to the end, you don't realize that you've been able to differentiate these various characters because of how they did it. And a book like this here, where I guess the only person that speaks differently is Solomon Grundy, because they do that to Grundy. You get kind of the shaky letters and a lot of ellipses and things like that. But yeah, it's meant to be. It's meant to make the reading experience easier. It's not supposed to be an effort to read a comic. Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. Any favorite moments? Favorite story beat? Favorite issue? Favorite moments? Or least favorite? Because I have to say, I remembered In my recollection, I'm happy to say I liked it better this time. I remembered like the poison ivy bit being my least favorite part,
Yeah.
basically just because there's a large. It's not as large as I remember, but there's a large chunk of the story where Batman's just out of commission. Bruce Wayne's out of commission. Batman's out of commission. It's like, well, now we're doing a Batman story without Batman, and I'm like, if I wanted that, I would watch The Dark Knight Rises, but I don't generally want that. And I read a Batman book, I want to be following, Bruce Wayne or Batman, especially when you're so in his head. Like in this book, you're getting all of his thoughts. You're getting acquainted with like him narrating the city. Like you inherit the same biases as Bruce Wayne / Batman. You start getting suspicious of Harvey because Batman's suspicious of
Yeah.
Harvey. Like I'm not sure I
Right.
was really buying the Harvey thing apart from the fact that like, well, I can't remember the last time Batman was just dead wrong on something. It's like, and to say that it's Harvey because everything points back to the Dent household is a very near miss in my understanding of the conclusion. So it's like Batman was on the right trail. He just kind of, you know, was just one beat off. But I remember the Ivy thing being my least favorite. I think it's still kind of my least favorite using poison ivy as kind of a honey trap, or a honeypot trap for Bruce. Although I do like that Catwoman is the one who comes and liberates him. And she liberates Bruce, not
Yes.
Batman.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's Catwoman liberating Bruce, not Selina liberating Bruce, and
Right.
not Catwoman liberating Batman, because they don't know each other's identities in this book, right?
Yeah, no, they don't. They don't. That canonically hasn't happened yet. That canonically will happen during Hush. In terms of like the first thing that happened. So that's so 96. I was like no 203 or something like that. So we're still like 6-7 years
Yeah.
away from that happening. I that part isn't the strongest storyline. I think for myself and maybe Drew, I don't want to speak for you here because we talked about it earlier. The art in that issue is just so good. Like
Yeah.
anytime we see Ivy,
know,
it's just it's so good that I can gloss over the fact that
Sale made the most out of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. I think the looking back now, I know why they did this story beat. It's not my favorite. The are like star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet between the two families.
Yeah.
I think that's only there to maybe throw a false trail that it could be an inside job, right? That maybe the daughter was doing it all because she wants out or something like that. That doesn't really go anywhere, and so I feel like maybe we could have because those are characters we don't care about. Like, so I don't care that they're from rival families who are in love and can't, like, I don't care for them. So I didn't really need that there, but I think they did it to show that there could be motivation on one side or the other to betray their family. So I feel like maybe they could do something different with that. The one that I'm really torn on though, in terms of, I don't know if I like it or not. So I want to ask you guys about it. The flashback to Thomas Wayne, the idea that he would help anybody because he's a doctor.
Hippocratic oath. Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's Harvey Mudd. You set the leg, right? John Wilkes Booth. So the fact that he would work with the mob and treat a guy in his house because this guy can't go to the hospital, but because he's a doctor, I'm going to treat this guy like anybody else. So the idea that either that means what you think that means about Thomas Wayne is he compromised in that way because he would willing to do that or whatever. Just the idea that we got to throw that little bit on there, and for Bruce to see that and be like, oh my God, my dad worked for the mob. And it's like, well, did he? Like, did he really? Or was he just being a doctor?
Well, and that's one of those story beats they lifted almost verbatim for Matt Reeves' The Batman, right?
Exactly,
there's that whole interaction, where he even says, like Mike said, like he took a Hippocratic oath, Batman's or, Bruce Wayne's very much like, no, he had nothing to do with it. But I mean, it's hard to pinpoint stuff that like didn't work or stuff I didn't like. Because I think the story just flows so well. And even with the star-crossed lovers thing, it's like, well, did that conjure up some jealousy or, is it something, I mean, some of the stuff I love that sticks out just without even like opening the book. The first thing is, and it's not really a story beat as much as it is just the ability for Sale to use 2 full pages for his artwork with no panels. There's a
Yeah.
couple of those in there where it's just a
A gorgeous
full
splash
spread.
page. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about the one you mentioned with all the rogues gallery in the office
Which is maybe the most famous scene from this book.
Absolutely. Like that should be a piece of art just hanging on a wall somewhere, you know. There's the double page with Batman and the Joker in the plane, which if there was one thing that I would be like, doesn't fit as well, maybe I would say it was the Joker in the plane, but it's such a Joker thing to do.
That's the most superhero-ish part of this book.
Yeah.
That moment right there.
Right.
I feel like that's the most exaggerated he draws the Joker to. Like that's where he's got the longest chin, the biggest, yeah. But that's the most ridiculous, quote unquote, part of the book. The most superhero, super villainy part. And it's just that one moment though.
But exactly.
What I'll say I love about the Joker issue though, is that I think like I just roll my eyes every time I go into a comic shop and the wall is saturated with Joker stuff.
Yeah.
And like everybody wants to write about the Joker. He's got his own books. And now there's always like a Harley book going and it always has something to do with the Joker. And, you know, there's all these like other off stories. And I think Loeb's Sales Long Halloween gets the Joker right in the proportion. Like he's not a dominant figure here. And really he thinks he's the main villain, the main attraction. It's really like, God, just get out of the way, man. Like there's something bigger going on and you're just being a pain. Like I think that's the way to do the Joker.
I think one of the panels is even him in the plane. He's like, just put the plane down. Like, you know, it's like, it's not even like.
Well, no, there is a jilted lover aspect to this. And I'm with you. Again, I am very much over the character of a Joker in general. Like I think there's a lot of fatigue there. I know it sells really well. People love it, but Batman stories that aren't focused on the Joker are some of my favorites. I think it's why I do like Hush. Joker's in there. And even in Hush, at one point, someone questions him, like, wait, why are you doing this? And his answer is like, it seemed like it'd be a funny, good idea. Like, why are you why are you a part of this when this isn't what you do? He's like, it seemed like a good idea. It seemed like it'd be fun. You know, I get a kick out of that. And so,
but that's all he's ever really supposed to be. And I think my point about like how they have introduced, for better or worse, this idea of like psychoanalyzing characters to an extreme. I think people have had a field day psychoanalyzing the Joker. When really it's just like, I mean, analyzing him is almost like looking in a mirror. It's like, like he's like so chaotic. He's almost a clean slate. Like, it's like, you know, I feel like I learn a lot more about the writer every time I see someone trying to focus on the Joker than I do about the Joker.
100%. The way the Batman writer writes the Joker will tell you a lot about their book, I think, in terms of the importance they put on it, the whatever motivations they give him or don't give him. That's a pretty good barometer. It's not the only barometer, but for me, it's a pretty good barometer in terms of how is this person going to be as a Batman writer? What is their approach to the Joker? For me, hopefully it's minimized and it's small doses. That's my personal preference. But I think.
Well, and it is great that in like this year-long mystery, Batman can't give his undivided attention to it because there are still people like the Joker out there. And I think that's what gives this like a really lived-in feeling. I think if there were no side plots, no subplots going on at all, this wouldn't work for 13 oversized issue.
Oh no, you have to show that passage of
texture.
Time. You have to make it believable in the story that when you end one book and you pick the next one up, that it's the next month. You know, that time has passed and they still haven't figured out the answer yet. And they're still working on it because other stuff going on, you know, that they can't just be laser focused on this one case. And if the story doesn't have those points there, then you're right. Yeah, I think it falls apart. The structure falls apart. You can't do it as the year-long story. You can't do the every month setup and gimmick if you don't put the work into make it believable to the reader that time has passed and there are other things going on and other things that all three of them have to deal with.
Right.
So any other best or worst moments for you guys? I don't know if I have a single best moment other than like there are treatments of characters here which are the definition of the character for me.
Sure.
Um, which is saying something like 50 years into these characters. And the fact that almost 25 years have passed since this book came out,
Yeah, so for
and
25 years, yeah.
several of these
Yeah.
characters still have not
I
been
mean,
outpaced. Like
we're going
and,
on like 60, 70 or some of these characters now.
I mean, yeah, and if I go, I mean, let's look back at the last 13 years of Batman, which would be all of the New 52, all of Rebirth, which is just hit issue 150.
Yeah.
That's 200 plus issues of monthly or twice a month Batman, and I can't remember ever having this great of an encounter with like the Falcone Maroni clans, those feuds. It's always about some supervillain.
Well, yeah, because Batman as a character and his Rose Gallery has moved beyond organized crime. Organized crime was that's a year one, year two thing. And so if you want to tell stories in that, you have to go back at that time period. If you're telling stories now, it's all about supervillains. It's all about where things have progressed to, where they've advanced to. So yeah, you're not going to get a story. You're not going to get current day Batman really going up against the mob. I'm sure there's a story out there where like someone's nephew or something like that is like the last surviving one who wants revenge, or there's probably a story in there, but you're not going organized crime in that way. Just doesn't, like, that's been erased from Gotham City. Their crime is on a different level now.
Now, whenever we get any kind of mention of some sort of type of organized crime, it usually involves like the Penguin or some other supervillain,
that
running
is true.
sort of the low level stuff.
Yeah,
and
that
it's
is true. That is true.
But it definitely isn't prominent.
It is,
although I do think that there's space for, I believe Mike Jorgensen wrote a treatment for a Batman story taking place in 1942 Gotham,
that
where all
was
the
my
men
treatment.
the men go off to war, and so then the crime families move in, and now it was a great story, by the way. But
well,
I had to shout out
and
Mike's
that
original
Wayne Tech
treatment.
was developing all of the technology for the war,
war.
and Bruce Wayne was testing it all on the streets. So like it was like
It was
just
brilliant.
far enough ahead of like what everyone had seen before, but not implausibly so.
Right.
Whereas like, I remember like Tynan's first issue, like the gadgetry got so out of control. I got giddy about it because I love Batman gadgets. I love Bond gadgets. I love Batman gadgets. Like I'm just a sucker for it. But he's like got some creature that's like crawling up the wall, like scaling a building. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. But also like
kind of ridiculous.
That's not 18 months from now technology.
Yeah.
That's like, that's like not plausible technology.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the suspension of disbelief with the character in general is whatever level of technology the author needs for the character.
Right. I like it to just be like just a notch beyond like what our world can do.
And I think that's why a story like this, which is self-contained miniseries, can be evergreen and always sell, because it is set in a specific time and place that feels, for lack of a better word, realer than any of the stories from the past 25 years in the main Batman line or detective line. Because the story is always going to advance with the time, so it always feels current to that by writing what is essentially a period piece and having it be its own self-contained story. Like, this is how stories become evergreen. This is why you can always go back to it. Not saying there haven't been great stories, great isolated arcs in the past 25, 30 years. There have been phenomenal ones for Batman. But they're not going to have the impact that a book like this has, because it is fundamentally standalone. It's essential to it. It is part of the universe, but you can come to it at any time, just with the knowledge, like the basic pop culture knowledge of who Batman is. You don't need anything else. You don't need to have anything else. You don't need to know what came before or what comes after. It's designed to be that reader friendly. It's I don't know if that was their intention, but that the end result is that it's incredibly reader friendly.
Yeah. By the way, I had a question for you guys who are both more steeped in this than I am. Is Carla Vitti an invention of this book, or is she in other things? You know, the big, as I think that's her name.
I believe she was an invention of this book.
Yes, I
Um,
believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, because it's
Yeah.
very interesting that the first full splash page, but like the second page of the book, it pans across the wedding guests.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you notice her, and I was trying to figure out why. And it's like I was like, well, I think she's like drawn in more detail than everyone else. She's not, but she's making eye contact with the reader. She's looking like right at the camera, and it's like, bam, that's how you spotlight her. She's not dead center. She's not in like a greater focus. There's no spotlight on her or anything like that.
Yeah.
But the fact that like you're looking at her, it's like one of the creepy.
Yeah, but we don't meet her proper until
much later. Yeah,
it was later because she goes back to Italy and comes back. So yeah, but you know, and she's a recurring character in the rest of this
the Loeb
iteration of,
verse.
I don't what we're called the long Halloween verse, whatever. She is she in, I don't know if she's in Dark Victory, but she's definitely in Catwoman When in Rome, which again, as I mentioned, that book takes place concurrently on the timeline with Dark Victory. So she's still around. She is a character, and I do believe that the extended Maroni Falcone family, I think a lot of those are Loeb and Sale inventions, or maybe they were name checked way back in the day. And that, but their treatment, their characteristics, everything about them, their man, like all of that is now because of what was in this book. You know, the way we think of those characters now is because of Long Halloween.
Yeah. I'm approaching the end of my notes. It's one of those books where it's like I could keep talking about it for hours and hours. But you know, you also have to have a stopping point somewhere. All of this to say, like, I think it's probably my favorite Two-Face story, a Harvey Dent Two-Face story.
Oh, without question.
Certainly that trio of characters, this is the iconic thing. And I just want more of it. And no shade at all. I very much enjoyed Dark Victory, and I enjoy Haunted Night. And I'm going to read the next thing that's coming out that I can't even remember, the last Halloween.
Last Halloween, yeah. Batman,
like, I'll read it
the
all.
Long Halloween dash the Last Halloween. That's
right.
That's going to be that's going to be tough on the
Solicit,
the tab in the long box. But yeah,
I'm like, but none of them quite scratch the same itch as this book. They're like 7 out of 10s, and this is a 10 out of 10. So it's like, it's no shade at that, no shade at their other work, but they just crushed it the first time. And it's almost the curse of success where,
well, technically the second time, the Haunted Night stuff technically did come first. Those 3 specials came first.
Yeah.
They printed first.
Yes. I
thought they were released later as a prequel.
No, they were published. They were 3 individual stories.
That may cast a new light on it now.
Yeah, they're 3 individual stories that all revolve around Halloween. And so they put them together as Haunted Night. That came out before that was their first swing at Batman and the Batman universe. And then so, you know, and because they weren't meant to be an actual continuous story, they're 3 separate stories. It's a little different read to it.
Yeah.
So then when you get to Long Halloween a couple years later, when this comes out, whatever kinks in the system they may have had been smoothed out. And these guys at this point had been working together 96. So about 5 years now where they've been working together, and I think almost exclusively working together. I don't know if they did any other major interior stuff in between from when that first Challenge of the Unknown book came out in 91 to when this started coming out in 96. So I think they were only working together. And so by this point, I think whatever working relationship they had, they were in that groove. And I think this is when it starts. This until pretty much the next 10 years, everything they do is almost flawless. But I think you see that you only see that in long-term partnerships on books. And I think when creators work together on multiple different books, multiple different styles of books, that challenge both of them as writer and artist, that when a team gets into a storytelling groove, you can see it. And when it's at its best, you get a book like Long Halloween.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean it's lightning in a bottle is
Yeah.
is really
Yeah,
way
yeah,
to
no,
say it.
yeah. There's something serendipitous about writer and artist getting paired together. Like something has to happen, in terms of how they come together, and when they do, when you get something like this, the stories of how some of the my favorite duos and my favorite teams in comics. Like, I know all three of us are fans of Tom King and Mitch Gerrits. Like, they got paired together because Tom King's first book was about his time in Iraq. And so they hired a guy who had just done Punisher because he drew a lot of military stuff and drew a lot of guns. That happened to be Mitch Gerrits. And it turns out Mitch Gerrits doesn't just want to draw that. He wants to draw weird, crazy superhero stuff.
He
and
wants
that
to
lets
draw
him do
Darkseid
Batman.
eating a carrot stick. Yeah.
That lets him to Batman, Mr. Miracle, Strange Adventures, all that kind of stuff. My favorite team in comics is Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Sean Phillips was the inker for Michael Lark, on a book that Lark and Brubaker did called Scene of the Crime. He was the inker, not the pencilist, but that's the first time they worked together. Then from there, they start working together. They do an Elseworlds book at DC, and then pretty much do everything together for the next like 20 years. So it's happened since how these things come together. And so how Loeb and Sale come together initially at DC and start working on these books, there's something otherworldly, I think, in terms of how creative minds come together, how people who have a similar storytelling sensibility, whatever it is, whatever connection it is, they come together and said when it fires completely and 100%, the only way you get a book like this. Again, I think every creator hopes to create like an evergreen book, right? Not just something that's lauded and people like, but something that is going to last and people are always going to go back to. Loeb and Sale have multiple of those. Like you'll see Long Halloween on the shelf forever. At a bookstore, at a comic shop, it'll always be on the list of great Batman stories. People are always going to come back and read it. It's lightning in a bottle, except for these guys, it happened multiple times. They got lightning a handful of times and told definitive stories. And I think that something about the idea of going into the head of the characters. We see it a little here in Batman's Counter Journals. We will see it a lot more in the other three books that we talk about: Superman for All Seasons, Daredevil Yellow, and Spider-Man Blue. We'll see it a lot more there. That examination, that interior examination. My favorite version of this is Batman Ego, which is written and drawn by Darwin Cook.
Oh, Darwin Cook, yeah.
To where Batman has a literal conversation with Bruce Wayne. But it's also why I said last week, Mike, that Tom King is a spiritual successor to the work that like Jeph Loeb has done, because he loves a narration box, and B, all of his miniseries, his maxi series, whatever he's done, the stuff that he did for a large chunk of time are all these deep character examinations. They're the sad superhero looking out the window, right? That's the running joke for him. But a book like this that examines the superhero in that way, we didn't see a lot of that. That wasn't the point of superhero comics at the time, and you really only saw that in miniseries like this, and something that was in continuity but not part of the main line. So if you didn't read it, it was okay. It was a separate thing. And we're seeing that more and more prevalent across all characters, across all publishers. That if you can't just have your character be the hero, there has to be an examination of to why. And I don't want to say it starts here, but I think this is the best example of it. This is the first one you look at and be like, if you can do something like this, if you can tell a story like Long Halloween, it'll last, it will resonate, readers will come to it. So again, I don't know if it's the first, but I definitely think it's one of the best.
Yeah, that reminds me of the quote of like, always be yourself. Unless you can be Batman, then be Batman. Yeah. And it's like, always tell your own story. Unless you could tell the Long Halloween, then tell the Long Halloween.
Yeah. If you can somehow mimic this, because the influence of it has, I think you see it in how superheroes are treated coming after that, and for Loeb and Sale, it starts here and they continue that, they use this model of kind of storytelling structure in the stories they tell for the next, from here on, about the next 10 years of them working together. And you see its influence in, as comics started to change, I think necessarily change, superhero comics in the early aughts, into what they started to become in the 2010s and where we are now. That kind of shift in focus of how we approach and how we present our superheroes, that they're not just guys beating up random bad guys, that there's more depth to characters on both sides of the line, because that's what readers are now expecting. And I think it makes it for a more fulfilling story in my mind.
By the way, I looked this up just now because I was curious what this book was up against. So January 1997 is the listing for Long Halloween.
Yeah.
January 1997 would
I
have
think
been
it came out in October though. Yeah, but
but that's what the date they stamp on the cover. So
Yeah.
well, the date they stamp on the cover is always a couple months beyond ahead of where it comes out. Yeah. So
Yeah.
So if you track the same one in the main Batman storyline, that'd be Batman 538.
Yeah.
Which was Darkest Night of the Man-Bat, Part 3 of 3.
Yeah.
Redemption, written by what's his name? Doug.
It's Doug Mensch and
Doug Mensch. Which I think there was like I'm sure Batman 538 probably outsold Long Halloween Part 1, but I'm really curious what happened the next month. Like when word got out, like, you want to watch Man-Bat Darkest Night of the Man-Bat Part 3, or do you want to read the greatest Batman story?
This is one of those things. Well, that's the thing though. Like, I don't think it was the greatest Batman story told as it was coming out. Like
that's interesting.
And that's something that I don't think three of us can comment on because we weren't reading it when it came out.
No, we need to get like a comic book shop owner on to talk about it.
I would be curious.
Say, like, what was the water cooler talk for this?
We could probably go back. Comic-Con probably has sales data going back that far. I'm curious if this, because this feels like the kind of book that builds, but you wouldn't see it until issue 4 because orders are already in for the way comic book ordering works. Like you're 3 months ahead. So this is the kind of book I could see that maybe would have built, because of word of mouth, because it was so different. And it's something that people wanted to get in on. It is, I would be curious to know, again, you're right, how it would have tracked into stores if hardcore Batman readers would have seen it. And because I could totally see at the time someone looking at sales art and being like, what's this? Like being turned off by it,
right,
because that wasn't the norm. That wasn't house style for superhero books.
Yeah.
And, so now having a great variation in style is celebrated at both Marvel and DC. And obviously that exists in creator-owned comics and indie comics because you can do your own thing. But the embrace of radically different art styles is the norm now. But it wasn't back then. And so, I found it,
by the way.
Okay, what would you go? Did you go to Comic-Con?
I did.
Okay,
which is a website I've never even heard of.
Yeah,
but I know some of your insider baseball.
They track that they have sales data going back. I don't know how far, but pretty darn far. So did you find?
Yeah, so this was November of 1996. And Batman 538. By the way, there were 14 Batman titles that month.
Which only makes it 5 less than, so they're probably going to come out this week from DC. Yeah,
that's true. It's only 5 less than this week.
Yeah.
There were 67,778 of Batman 538 sold.
All right.
And 56,771 of Batman: The Long Halloween, which I think is pretty strong for
That's pretty good
first issue. I mean,
it's a number 1 though. Yeah, it's a number 1. I could see that.
Right, it's tracking 20,000 behind the main Batman title.
That's still pretty good.
That it doesn't sound crazy to me. But like I said, I'm very curious about month 2.
Also, it's a completely different market.
I would think so. Yeah,
completely different comic market than we're in right now. The mid late 90s was a totally different animal, but still,
Yeah. But then those numbers, like that gap, about 20,000 different, stayed the same in the second issue. But again, the water cooler talk takes a while to circulate. There are books like I slept on. What was the last one that got really really big that I just was totally asleep on for like 6 months? Was it Ewing's? No, it was before. It was the Immortal Hulk.
Immortal Hulk, yeah.
Who did that
Mhm.
one?
That was Al Ewing, yeah.
Al Ewing, yeah.
Yeah.
I just felt like a fool. I was like, man, like these have been flying out. It's in like fourth or fifth printing. You think it would have caught my eye, but it would just never occur to me to look at a Hulk title. Just because it's not really my thing.
Jump to issue 4.
I was gonna say I looked at issue 3. The gap is closed. It's only 10,000 difference. Issue 4. All right, this is like because serious nerding. Okay, so issue Batman
4 would
the
have
main
been
title is plummeting by issue 4, and now they're within 9,000 by in difference, which is like
even.
That's pretty good. That being said, Batman Long Halloween issue 4 only sold 2,000 more than Batman Wildcat.
I was going to say there's also Batman Chronicles,
and
there's
Legends
Batman
of the Dark
Blackgate,
Knight, and Shadow of the Bat,
Legends of the Dark Knight. Yeah, so there's a lot of Batman titles.
Batman and Robin Adventures.
There's a ton there. Well, I mean, they're trying to reach every audience there, but again, because 4 is the first issue that would have been that you could have ordered after someone had read 1.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because the way that solicitations work there. So if there's going to be a jump, it would have been after people read 1 and be like, oh my God, I got to make sure, like, the demand is, it's selling out now. So shops up their orders to make sure that they can cover. They can't know anything about 2 and 3. They're going to get what they get. But at 4, they could start ordering for expected demand. Does it jump above the main Batman title at any point?
That would be good to know. I'd have to do a lot of clicking to get there. But just for perspective, I mean, I think of Batman as has been one of the top 10 selling characters or titles in the time I've read comics, which granted is a very short window.
But, it always has been though.
It was the 30th best selling book that month.
Long Halloween?
No, Batman was. Long Halloween was the 43rd best-selling book, which it's like, I promise you there are not 42 better titles than that because I'm looking at them and trust me. I doubt there was one better title that month, but it's a matter of people reading what they read.
We're still a couple years into Image too. So like, people are buying Image books because they're the new hotness at the time. And so I think most of those books are kind of junk, but in the moment you wanted that because you needed to get the stuff drawn by Lee and McFarlane and
but I found it shocking that month, which is February 97, none of us were buying comics at that point. So no shade at anyone here, but Iron Man sold more than twice as much as Batman did. That being said, Iron Man fans had 1 title to buy. Batman fans had 13 titles. And so you're dividing your Batman fan base every time you do that. So I'm sure if you added up all the Batman titles, it'd be crushing Iron Man in 97. No shade at Tony Stark.
And that's always the thing though. Like, but Batman is a perennial seller. So if you were to look at DC solicitations now, like over half of the books they release would be Bat family related, like without question. They may not only be Batman titles, but it'd be Batman, Joker, Harley, Nightwing, like they would be Bat family adjacent, because he sells the most. It's very similar to Spider-Man on the other side of the street. Spider-Man sells, Amazing Spider-Man is Amazing Spider-Man, but you can have multiple spin-off titles and then everyone related, in the wider Spider-Verse because those books sell, because the characters have always sold.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it overtakes the original, the regular mainstream Batman series at all. Although it does beat out Batman Predator Blood Ties. So,
that's a shame because that's a classic. That's a classic. Yeah.
It does come within about 4,000 units though. So it does close that gap over the span of time. It closes that gap down to 4,000 units, which isn't bad.
The overall numbers. Did the overall sales for individual issues stay about the same, like the raw number? Did they go up a little bit or
they stayed? It looks like they went up a little bit, but it looks like the average was about 52,000.
Okay, all right, so
52,000.
So the people that were buying it and the shop, those come. I mean, thing about sales numbers. The thing about those sales numbers, you got to understand those are that's what distributors sell to stores. That's not actual sell-through data. So that's what stores are ordering.
Right.
But for them to hold about steady throughout a miniseries that in and of itself is a win, because right now you look at miniseries now, number one is huge, and then there's usually just a massive drop off to two.
Then there's the trade waiters.
Yes, because everyone buys the new number one, here. And then then orders plummet for 2 and 3, and if it's a decent series, it'll stabilize. But there's always a huge peak at once. So the fact that it stayed relatively level throughout meant stores were comfortable. And it's, again, the world was completely different 25, almost 30 years ago, but they weren't afraid to order this book and keep it there. So
that's when you had to write your pull list on a piece of like perforated notebook paper, like a
well, no, I'm sure Diamond was using that was,
no, I mean, as like a user, if you went into a shop, you had to give them like a handwritten notes, like cut out of a magazine, like a serial killer. And now we can all order our pull list without even talking to a person.
But I mean,
the way God intended it.
Yes.
It's hurt me though, like not going in and doing the physical like exchange of the pool list data, because
you miss out on the conversation, and you miss out, maybe there's something you didn't know about.
Well, and shout out to Kendall at Up and Away in Cincinnati, who shoved Mr. Miracle #1 in my hand as I was checking out. I was like, I didn't pull this. He's like, trust me, you're gonna want this. And I was like, I don't even know who this character is. He was like, you want this book? Yeah. And I was like, he's like, I know you want this book. And even if I didn't want that book, I think that became like a $50 first issue. So it was like, it probably floated down since it went to trade, but it was like the hot item within days. But I was there Wednesday at lunchtime, and he was like, trust me. I think he even maybe said, which I don't want to give him a bad reputation, because if you know Kendall, you know Kendall. I think he even said, like, if you don't like it, I'll give you your money back. Which I don't think Kendall's ever said that sincerely to anyone.
Well, no comic shop ever says that. But and so that does make me think, though. I'm sure there were comic shop owners that were pushing this book because they saw something different in it. Like, hey, there's something cool here, and again, Loeb and Sale they had worked together for a few years now. They were a known-ish quantity, and so this is the kind of book you could hand sell to a reader coming in. Oh, you like Batman? Read this. So if you were coming in and you were reading Batman, and they knew those customers were, a shop could totally be like, you want to read this book. This is going to be important. This is going to be good. And because a good shop owner knows that. So I wonder how much that contributed as well to its kind of steady sales. But I mean, its longevity just comes down to how well it was crafted.
Yeah, and there's a timelessness to it. It's like, it's one of those things where if they had tried to, like, I just read it a couple hours ago, and there are no cell phones in it, but there's also no rotary phones in it. It's like they figured out a way to make it timeless, so that it, like, which I remember, like, Jerry Seinfeld talking about like the jacket he bought in that one episode and how they never revealed the price. He was like, well, I wanted the episode to be timeless. So like, I didn't want to say it's a $250 jacket, and 20 years from now, people are like, oh, that's a reasonable price for a jacket. So he's like, I just left the price of the blazer out of the episode. But then he's got, like, in the same season, an episode about like trying to get someone's like voicemail tape out of their machine to like delete a message. And it's like, that one requires a lot of explanation these days.
Well, and well, you know what? And I think this is one of those things, because there are plenty of stories, like you watch TV shows even like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when cell phones weren't ubiquitous, and you're like, this whole episode is negated if someone had a cell phone, like one call, and this story falls apart entirely. You don't miss that here. You don't miss the technology, even though nothing about it says period piece, like nothing in the language, nothing really in the clothing, anything like that. And part of that's probably due to Sale's style, but nothing about it says period piece, even though it clearly feels that way. But the absence of the modern technology is, I feel, I'm with you. You don't miss it. You don't think, oh, well, if someone just had a cell phone here, this would be totally different. You're not thinking about with this type of story versus if you're reading Batman now, like the current day Batman now, you have to figure in the fact that like people have cell phones, like that technology exists. Not that you have to use it in the story, but you have to kind of plot your story around the fact that this is the world we live in now. All characters, all superheroes have that, it's just because you're reading the character in quote unquote our world. But I don't think you feel that absence at all in this book. There's no point where you're like, well, I wish they had cell phones or anything like that, wish they had a computer that ran or the internet or anything. You're not thinking about that with this story. There is a timeless quality to it. And I don't know if that was intentional for them. I don't know if they thought that far ahead.
I think with the Batman story, it's like hard to, and I don't think is there a Batmobile in this book? I think
it shows up briefly. I think when he's trying to catch up to the Joker's plane.
Yeah.
I think he has it, but even
they don't like make a meal of it.
Yeah, and even the Joker's flying like a biplane, which you're like, but that's such a Joker
would do
move.
that in 2024.
It's a Joker thing.
Yeah, it's such a Joker
thing,
move that he would do that. So it's like,
it's the Joker being like the North by Northwest scene.
Yeah, the Batmobile thing's a good thing. You're right. It might just be in that one bit.
But can you imagine as an artist resisting your own take on the Batmobile? Like the great personal restraint of not trying to like, because at that point, people, well, obviously comic readers picture whatever's in the comics, but like the Michael Keaton one has already entered the public consciousness as like an iconic Batmobile.
So is the animated series at this point as well.
Yeah,
right.
They both existed. That definitely feels intentional. I'm with you there. That choice there, but I don't know if you try to make a timeless story, a timeless book, I think you're most likely going to fail. But the end result here is
if we had seen
created
in the cockpit of the Batmobile and the heads-up display, that type of stuff just ages so fast.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Which, like, shout out to like Jon Favreau, who had to do it in film with Iron Man. And like, I rewatched 2008 Iron Man this year, and I was like, dang, his technology at home still holds up. It's still cool.
It still looks good. But that's the exception, though. Right. But yeah,
when you watch an old Bond movie and they're like, it's a radio that can fit inside your shoe, and Sean Connery's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, oh boy, this is bad. And then when they ironically give Daniel Craig the same thing, it's like a pistol with a little tiny handheld radio, and like Bond makes fun of it. Was like such a great
being, need some meta humor in your spy.
Well, and they're also like acknowledging, we really ate it when we try to predict technology all the time. Let's just not do that anymore. That being said, I'm fine with the next Bond being like real gadgety. If they pull it off well, I just really need more James Bond in my life. Is really what that's about. So anyway, all right. Well, that is all my thoughts. Any last call for thoughts on the long Halloween Loeb sale?
Drew, anything?
No, I really appreciate you guys having me on. I'll sit and talk about Batman all day long. So I appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
No, this was a lot of fun. No, I'm at the end of my notes here. I think it's just I think just to echo, I think what we've said here, there is something about this that I think you said it, Drew, that there's like a quintessential nature to Batman and these characters that it's presented in this story, which makes it that timeless feel again, which is why it'll be an evergreen book. It'll always be a book that's sold. It'll always be on that list of greatest Batman stories. And maybe, Mike, it's what you said of you can give it to anybody who just wants to read a great story. Maybe Batman's the barrier. Maybe capes and cowls are a barrier for them. This is a book I think someone can read.
I think it
because you can get
pierce
past
that barrier.
Yeah, you can get past that superhero barrier. It's just the timeless quality of it is what makes it last. And again, to be able to create a story that will be in print forever, that people will always read and come back to as inspiration. Again, not just for Batman, but for really telling any kind of superhero story. I mean, it's kind of truly amazing. And no, there's a, I think there's a reason why people go back to it for all the movies and adaptations, whether they use this story or not. This version of the character is become the one that we think about. And said, I as a creator or someone like that, I can't think of anything that'd be cooler to know that the work you put into it becomes the defining text of a character that at this point has been around. What are we on? 85 years. I think 85 years next year. I think next year's 85. Oh no, 85 is this year maybe. I think 85 is this year.
Like, well, whatever it is, there will be 1,000 variants for it whenever they decide it's the official.
I think
85th this year.
Oh no, wait, hold on.
85th anniversary.
We're somewhere close to that, but again, the idea that you could create a definitive text for a character that has had so many people write it, again, I think that's got to feel pretty cool. So
yeah, that's great. Drew, thank you so much for joining us. I think by the time this episode drops a few weeks from now, your first episode of your new podcast will be dropping.
Hopefully, yeah, should be up pretty soon,
like first week of August.
Yeah.
So if you want to give it a 30-second plug, yeah,
it's called Points of Articulation Toycast. We talk about toy collecting, modern and vintage. We talk about a little bit of everything. So a little bit of comic books, a little bit of whatever. But yeah, really trying to hit that nostalgia button for everybody. So
yeah, I mean, all you need. Well, and I this is a really deep cut, but you and I both know the man who modeled as a boy on the lightsaber box. We
do.
In the like late 80s, early 90s, which was like the most mind-blowing thing ever when it was just like some dude that we both happen to know. And he's like, oh yeah, did I not mention this? I'm like, I would wear that on a t-shirt every day.
I would have that box printed on a shirt. Oh yeah, absolutely.
With like, this is me arrow pointing down at it. And I would always have a lightsaber on me if I was that kid, if I was that kid. You never outrun that identity. So anyway, I was like, well, I'm not into toys so much anymore. I don't have any, or I don't have very many anymore because I ended up like, giving them away, donating them, selling them, passing them to the family and whatnot. But I've seen you posting about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, nope. I had that AT-ST Walker. Yeah, I had the what's Boba Fett's ship?
The Slave One.
One, yeah. I'm like,
well, that's the whole goal of the podcast is to get people on to just talk about the toys they love. They don't have to be an expert. They could literally just come on and talk about the toys they love. So,
and that makes sense. Now we talked about earlier, the idea of the hunt is part of the hobby.
Exactly.
When you're looking for something, the internet makes it so easy, but it's not about it. It's less about having the thing, and it's almost all about looking for it.
Absolutely.
Trying to find the thing that you don't have. And the hunt is such a big part of the collecting hobby, whether it's comics or toys or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Putting the effort into it is what makes it worthwhile. So you can look at it and be like, there's a story behind me having this.
Right.
And it's not clicking a mouse on eBay.
Exactly.
It's I found this at the third store I went to. I was looking for something else and it was there, and whatever it is, or this was out of order. It was in the wrong box, and I happened to flip through. There's a story that goes with it, and that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it great. So
absolutely,
that's awesome. So that's launching launching in a few weeks as you record this.
Should be out by the time this
probably
comes
already
out
by the time you're listening.
If it's out already, we'll put a link in the episode notes. And,
we'll do that.
Able to find it.
Absolutely.
The real hunt for me was when I went to sell my Star Wars toys like 10 years ago. And I had the TIE Fighter where if you press the buttons, the wings go flying
wings
off.
Pop out,
yeah.
I only had one of the wings. And I was like, maybe I could convince the shop owner that this is one from the Battle of Endor, the one that goes like, the wing flips off and it goes flying into the camera. And they use
battle damaged,
They use that as the swipe on the camera transition. I was like, he did not buy it. Both, he didn't buy the story or the product.
His loss.
Yeah. Because someone would have bought that. Because there's someone out there who has one wing and doesn't have the other wing.
Probably my wing.
Right.
I went and played at a friend's house, and it's like, Some parent gave it to Goodwill and a box of other stuff. But
exactly, yes.
Anyway,
someone could have completed a set with that. So yeah,
I'll tell you what though, I do have all of like my mom. I don't know why this of all things she saved. I do have all my Megazords. So I'd be happy to bring this over.
Those are probably worth some decent money these days.
If they're the original, if they're the OG,
they are the OG, and like the first 3 waves of it. But they were very loved and played with, so they weren't like box displays or anything. But anyway, we are so far off topic from the Long Halloween, and it's been an oversized issue anyway. But that's kind of the theme of the Long Halloween. So I think we're in good company. Thank you for listening. Find us on all the places, and all the links are in the link tree in our bio, storiedarcs.com. Follow us on socials media, and we will keep you up to date. And we will be back next week with
Superman for all seasons. Yep, 4 issues. We'll talk about that and get into kind of how it also compares to the book we just talked about too. So we'll kind of look at them in tandem. So go out and read Superman for all seasons.
I'm super excited. I'll see y'all next week.
Peace.